Hello friends, I welcome you in lecture number 38 on logic. In this lecture also we are going to discuss some other rules of inference for propositional logic. If you recall, we have discussed two rules of inferences for propositional logic and they were modus ponens and hypothetical syllogism. What is modus ponens? It says that whenever P and P implies Q are true, then we have the conclusion is Q, that is Q is also true. So whenever this conditional statement and its hypothesis both are true, then we can say that conclusion is also true, and this is known as modus ponens or law of detachment. And we have seen that this argument form is valid using truth table. We have also seen hypothetical syllogism, and this rule of inference says that whenever P implies Q and Q implies R, then we have P implies R, and we have also proved in previous lecture using truth table. So similarly we can write another rule of inference using truth table. We can check their validity also. So we are not going to check the validity of all these rules of inference using truth table. You can check if you wish, otherwise we are going to remember all these rules of inferences, and using these rules of inferences we are going to check the validity of arguments or some other type of argument forms. Next rule of inference is modus tollens. Now this modus tollens says that whenever we have negation of Q and P implies Q, then this implies that we have negation P. Now you don't have to cram this rule of inference. You can use this modus ponens to derive this rule of inference. So we can remember in this way. First we recall that if we have P implies Q, then its contrapositive is negation of Q implies negation of P. We know that contrapositive statement of P implies Q is negation of Q implies negation of P. So suppose instead of writing P implies Q, I am writing negation Q implies negation P, and here I have negation Q. Now I can apply modus ponens for this argument form. What is modus ponens? It says that whenever we have P and P implies Q, then we have Q. Now if you compare this with this one, then you can see here hypothesis is negation of Q. So here hypothesis is P and conclusion is Q. So here we are writing Q. Here hypothesis is negation of Q and conclusion is negation P. So this, using modus ponens, we can write negation of P here. So if you don't want to cram this, you can use modus ponens and you can write modus tollens. So this is another rule of inference, and if you wish you can check the validity of this rule of inference using truth table also. Next rule of inference is addition, and it is very easy. It says that whenever we have one premise P, then we can say that P or Q. This means if P is premise and if it is true, then we know that P or Q is also true whenever P is true, because this is disjunction of two propositionals variable P and Q, and we know that disjunction is true if at least one proposition is true. So whenever P is true, we can write that P or Q is also true. Therefore this is also valid argument form, and this rule of inference is known as addition. And if we wish, we can use truth table also to check the validity. Next one is simplification, and here we are going to use conjunction of two propositional variables p and q. So whenever p and q is true, then we can write that therefore p. We know that p and q is true if and only if both p and q are true. Therefore this sounds good. We can understand this, that whenever p and q is true, therefore p is also true. So this we will remember as simplification. Next one is conjunction. So this is also easy to remember. Suppose I have two premises denoted by p and q, and if both p and q are true, then we have their conjunction is also true. So conjunction rule of inference is whenever p and q are true, then conclusion p and q is also true. Next one is disjunctive syllogism. This says that suppose we have two propositional variables p and q, and we have premises p or q and negation p. So this disjunctive syllogism says that whenever these two premises are true, then conclusion q is also true. Here this is also easy to remember. Suppose I have these two premises are true. Now this is true, that means either p is true or q is true. And here I have negation of p, that is p is not true or p is false. And this premise is true, and here p is false, therefore we must have q as true conclusion. So this is disjunctive syllogism. Next one is resolution. This says that whenever we have premises p or q, another premise is negation p or r, then the conclusion is q or r, and it is true whenever these two are true. So here also we have p or q. This is true if either p is true or q is true. Negation p or r, this is true if we have negation p or r. So suppose p is not suppose p is true. If p is true here, then here negation p is false. Now if p is true, then p or q is true. So here we must have r to be true because negation p is false. Similarly, if p is false, then negation p is true. So in that case, if p is false, then we must have q as true. So this sounds good. This is just to remember this rule of inference, that how we can remember this. So it means that here I have p and here I have negation p, therefore I must have q or r. So these are the rules of inferences which we are going to use to check the validity of given argument form or given argument. I have summarized all these rules of inferences here. We again summarize them. First one is modus ponens. This is very important. It says that if I have conditional statement and its hypothesis, then the conclusion is here. Hypothetical syllogism, it is similar to transitive property which we study in relations. This says that whenever p implies q and q implies r, then we must have p implies r. Simplification is whenever p and q is true, then we have conclusion p is true. Disjunctive syllogism, here I have premise p or q, here negation p, therefore I have q here. Modus tollens says that whenever p implies q and here I have negation q, then I have negation p. This we can derive using modus ponens, and p implies q can be written equivalently as negation q implies negation p, and you can see here now we can apply modus ponens, and here we have to write conclusion which is negation p. Addition is whenever p is true, therefore p or q is also true. conjunction is easy. Here we have P, Q, therefore conjunction of P and Q. For resolution, we are using three propositional variables P, Q and R. Here I have P or Q. Here I have negation P or Q. Therefore, I have Q or R. So remember all these rules of inferences for propositional logic, and using them we can check the validity of a given argument or given argument form, and we will discuss the problems related to this in upcoming lectures. Thanks for watching.